Hi, welcome everybody to this session on how humans transform EDA. So let me start with a quick introduction. My name is Steve Wood. I'm the Vice President of Platform here at Slack. Relative recent addition to Slack, actually. My history is actually as an entrepreneur, and I've mainly focused my career in the low-code and workflow space. I built a couple of companies. I sold one to Salesforce.com, and that became the Lightning Flow tool, which is used quite heavily at Salesforce today to drive workflows inside of the Salesforce application. And then I sold my second company to Dell, and I became part of Dell Boomi, which is a middleware technology integration provider there. And I held the position of Chief Product Officer there for some time. So I've only recently, I guess in the last 9 months, joined Slack. And so in some ways, much of my history is not in the collaboration space, but rather in the middleware space. So I'm more familiar, I suppose, with EDA type technologies than I am with collaboration tools. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But I do think that the opportunity here at Slack is tremendous. So that's kind of why I'm here. And I'm going to be able to give a little bit more insight into that as we go forward. So I guess one question you may be asking is, why is Slack here? What is Slack? That kind of stuff. So let me cover off some of those bases to get going. So Slack is a channel-based messaging platform. Some of you might think about it as a messaging platform to enable collaboration between people predominantly, but also increasingly partners. We have something called Slack Connect, and also with systems, which is actually the area that I work in the platform group. It's used by millions of people, and if you were watching the markets, you would know that we recently are in the process of getting acquired by Salesforce.com, one of the largest enterprise software acquisitions in history, which is pretty cool to be part of that journey. But in terms of the platform, if you think about what we're doing there, clearly we have the messaging-based platform, or product, I should say, and then we have a platform associated with it, which allows developers to extend Slack to do things more specific to what they need. If you think about that ecosystem, it's actually quite large. We have 2,450 plus integrations with Slack in our app directory. So things like Microsoft Outlook through to Jira, through to Salesforce, through to Microsoft Dynamics, they're all integrated with Slack through these integrations and these apps in our app directory. We also have actually many of our customers build custom apps on Slack. So we have over 800,000 custom apps that are being built by our customers to extend Slack in unique and wonderful ways. And with that, we have over 925,000 plus active developers on the platform. So it's a pretty vibrant ecosystem. But the statement on the slide, I'll sort of address that because it's actually, so our CEO likes to talk about the Slack platform specifically is we're the 2% of your software budget that is the multiplier of the other 98% of your software budget. So think like one way to think about that would be we're the 2% of your software budget that makes the other 98% better, would be one way to talk about it. I say it a little differently. It's not because anybody likes to disagree with the CEO and we don't, but I say it a little differently as the head of platform, which is I believe that Slack is the engagement layer for the event-driven enterprise. And I wanted to talk a bit about that because that's a relatively new position for Slack. And the statement that Stuart says here, who's our CEO, is quite bold. And I think our two kind of positions will come together. And I'll use this presentation to help bring those two positions to light. So in terms of the presentation, what we'll cover today are a few things, three key elements, I suppose, to a human-centric approach to EDA and how humans transform EDA. The first thing I wanted to talk about, or the first pillar, if you like, I wanted to talk about was the best-of-breed software model and how that's affecting things. The second is how we're looking at scaling human interaction in an event-driven world. And then kind of this human EDA, I suppose we're being a little cheeky with this idea of human EDA, which one way to think about it is really turning noise into productivity. How do we harness these events and allow people to be productive in this new world? So those are the three ways we think about it. But if you're thinking about like, if there was one takeaway that you took from this presentation, it would be that I do really see us as the engagement layer for the event-driven enterprise. I'd like to kind of articulate that to you as best I can using those three pillars. So The first pillar is, I suppose, to recognize that we have shifting to this best of breed software model. I don't think that comes as an enormous surprise to anybody. I think, I'm sure everybody listening to this is like, yes, that is true. And we're certainly seeing that as the move to cloud. And it's a change from, I suppose you'd see as these large best of suite software solutions to smaller and smaller best of breed purpose-built providers. And when I think about that, I almost see it as like a market inversion, which is to say that, kind of think about it like this, like you used to run your company on a small number of large best of suite systems. And we're moving that to a model where you do your day-to-day job as an individual using many best of breed systems. So it's kind of quite an inversion of many of the concepts, from company to individual, to best of suite to best of breed, to few to many. And when we speak to people like, say, in marketing, for example, they use 10 plus applications just to do their day-to-day job. So we're seeing that's a complete shift in how people work. And of course, that's being powered by things like cloud computing, plummeting switching costs, better integration technologies, moving data around. But I'd also say, as a CIO, this continuous realization that actually we need to really look at employee productivity, employee happiness, potentially as a North Star. Many of these applications that are these best of breed providers are really purpose-built to help them do their job in a particular way. But ultimately, what it's doing is it's creating, as much as creating maybe more employee happiness and more choice and more apps, but it's also creating a lot of new services in an enterprise. So many enterprises are grappling with over 1,000 plus services in their enterprise, which is a complete change from how it used to be. And I suppose putting maybe my middleware hat on, I would say it's creating it's getting a sort of a two-headed problem in my world, which is a proliferation of data, which is, of course, data is going all over the place, and that needs to be synchronized and kept up to date in many possible technologies, using EDA technologies, integration technologies, and the like, to kind of manage that problem. But also a proliferation of events. And when Slack thinks about events, we think about them maybe a little differently from how an EDA vendor does in some respects, but very much the same in others, which is we see it as systems that are vying for your attention because something has happened in that system that you need to know about. So for example, an opportunity has closed, or a case has been escalated, or a server has crashed, or an order has been provisioned, or a discount has been applied. As a manager, you probably would know, many of you, that if you're looking at just the simple approval situation, you have maybe new purchase orders in Coupa that you need to approve. You've got new employee changes you need to approve in Workday, and you've got new expenses you need to approve concur. And all of this is kind of happening across these different systems. Those are kind of examples of events where something has changed and it needs your attention. And at Slack, we don't believe the current generation of software is actually well positioned to handle this. And it's creating a lot of noise for our customers and for our employees, which is to say that actually for humans to manage their work in a real-time event-driven way. And when companies are transforming to real-time and event-driven, these kind of old sort of data-centric models aren't really working as well as we'd like. And I think, to be fair, that's part of the reason why Salesforce is in the process of acquiring Slack, is they're realizing that they want to reinvent CRM in this new world where really speed counts, real-time really counts. If there's something that happens with a customer, you want to know about it now, and you need an interface and a capability to do that. So we're really excited about that, obviously. And that's where we see our work with EDA more broadly and the industry more broadly. But I suppose if I was to speak again with my middleware hat on, I'd say often when we think about EDA in this sort of middleware system sense, we don't really think about the human aspect of EDA. We think about the huge number of events that are proliferating from IoT use cases and system-to-system work and banking and finance through to casinos and the like. There's a lot of events moving around, but some of those events do need a human in the loop. They do need a human attention. And the characteristics of what we see in Slack are very similar to the events we kind of think about when we think about like fast data and stuff like that. That when you're notified in Slack, the the value of that notification typically decreases with time. So what I mean by that is, like, if a server crashes, you kind of want to know about that now. Knowing about it a week from now is much less valuable, and the impact that it'll have had on the business will have already rolled through. But then equally, having the log of events, like the same way you think about like a share price, is also valuable. Being able to see the trend of events in Slack, and it's helpful for humans too. So we think about it like that. There's a lot of overlap between EDA as an industry and what we're trying to do at Slack, and kind of a lot of the work that we're working on this year at Slack. So the takeaway from this slide would be this, which is software today we don't feel is well equipped for the real-time event-driven world and that digital transformation. And we think in this sort of first pillar that how humans are going to sort of transform EDA, we need to recognize the shift to best-of-breed software. So with that, let me move to the second pillar, which is thinking about, at the same time, finding ways of how we kind of scale human interaction, because clearly with all these events, we need to think about, like, how do we scale a human to be able to handle this? Maybe if you're thinking about it, like in an EDA situation, a human has a fantastic throttling effect on how fast the events go through your organization. And we've been thinking about how to think about this event-driven world. And when Slack first came out, we focused a lot of our energy on bots. And the way I sometimes think about bots is it's humans talking to machines. And though I think that that's obviously a very powerful model, it certainly scales a lot of work that we do. We're moving our attention so it's less focused on that bot model and more about explicit automation, tailor-made by the user to better manage their work and their time in an event-driven world. That's kind of how we're thinking about it. Like, how do we actually scale human interaction in this new world? Because, I mean, this whole move to real time is a CIO imperative. We know that time matters. We know that knowing about changes drives tremendous alignment. But when you have 1,000+ systems in the enterprise that are all kind of wanting your attention, that's sort of human in the loop, they're doing it through a variety of ways, though. It's like through email and through SMS and through push notifications, which is kind of not really helping the human manage these events. And I'll talk about a number of customer scenarios that really make that point. Like, just pushing it to a human in any way isn't always helpful for that human to be able to act effectively. And what that's doing is often breaking the critical business processes that are happening at the organizational people level. So let me, this slide here, let me just sort of break a little bit from it. So I'll try to describe it maybe in the form of some customer examples around this of human events, if you like. On the left, which is humans interacting and collaborating in the sort of small W workflow, which is really just collaborating to get something done, through to the right-hand side, which is really about system-to-system stuff, the really structured, compliant processes side. And what we're seeing what our customers doing, for example, with United. So United Airlines, most people have probably flown United at some point. I am a member of the United club, but I think this is a use case because it's actually about obviously getting planes around, and obviously that's a critical transportation facility that we have. And the way they use Slack is they're actually using it to collaborate with airport staff and their systems and their partners with like airport related issues to make sure that planes are turned around in the fastest possible time, but also that, clearly things are very time sensitive. Also what's happening in the air can impact what they can do on the ground. So it's really critical that they're very aware of everything that's going on the ground, in the air, so that they can act most effectively and be most productive in their work, also holding obviously safety as a critical concern. And one of the examples that they talked to me about was, I thought it was kind of a fantastical example, is about a recent volcano eruption in Central America. And clearly that's quite a big event to occur, if you like, from a geographic perspective. And what was amazing about it was they used Slack and the events coming from systems to coordinate key ground operations and at their operations center at United, to kind of make sure the flights and the planes were doing the right thing, escalating using our workflows tool, and the platform really being that kind of central nervous system for how they were interacting and working with each other to make it all work. And it all worked beautifully, thankfully, without any incidents. They were also not just working with Slack, but also with SMS and WhatsApp. So really using different channels of communication to make sure that people were being coordinated to respond to these events coming from systems. and sensors, et cetera, stuff like that. So I thought the United use case was particularly cool. And these kind of irregular type events often happen in the transportation industry, and particularly with flights, it's critically important, as you can imagine. Another example would be a large hospitality chain that we work with. They have a number of assets. So we're working with our IT team, and they have a number of assets. They have some mobile assets for booking, as well as some website assets as well to help customers, book and do things like that. And what they've done is they've wired all their systems into Slack so that when they are developing code and checking in code, those events go into Slack. So code checked in, things like that, code deployed, code built, et cetera, code pushed to staging, production, et cetera. All those events actually are all coming into Slack. And what the team there does is use these events to understand what's actually happening. If they ever have an issue, say, for example, an event occurs where it's like, hey, like the server's hitting some performance issues, or we're actually having I hate to say it, a server outage of some kind, that they can look immediately back in Slack, understand all the event history that occurred. So they've got that logging history and they can see the trends. And then they can very quickly act and coordinate and drive these lightweight workflows, working with the various systems that they need, like Jira and various other systems to kind of redeploy or roll back, all happening directly inside of Slack using many, many different deployment and management systems across many different assets. And what that's ultimately done is reduce the response time down quite a bit. So it saves them, they think, it's between 30 and 45 minutes per issue, which is pretty amazing. And it saves them about 40 hours a week for quite a small team, actually. So just that use of events to help kind of people be coordinated when you bring in humans in the loop into an EDA scenario. So when I like to think about it is like, not only do you need to get the event to the human, but you need to make sure it gets to the right human at the right time. And ideally with a bit of automation so that they know what they can do, they can execute with excellence every time. And I think that that's how we can respond to this transformation to real time, this real-time event-driven enterprise. So I guess summarizing this pillar, I'd say when you think about how humans transform EDA, we need to think about ways that we can scale human interaction, because as I was sort of joking, but kind of true, that when you bring a human into the loop, that has a drastic impact on throttling of the work that's actually happening. So it's worth thinking about that. Right, so let me go into the last pillar then, which I suppose as a hallmark of my career in the kind of low code space and kind of building apps, workflow apps predominantly, and empowering new users to be able to build. I do think a lot of this has to also drive through in how we think about humans and EDA. When you think about, when I showed that diagram on the previous slide, that in the old world of these kind of very systematized processes, those often take a long time to build. They're often very known. They're not like responsive, like a United scenario of like a volcano erupting. Nobody could spend 3 years building a process for volcano eruptions. It might be a waste of time. I don't know, maybe it wouldn't, but you get my point. Is like these highly systematized processes are not really about empowerment. They're more about sort of that top-down control. So we need to think about how do we empower humans to be able to react in this way when these events occurs. How can they provide this automation that's needed? So when you think about the human side of it, it's like how they're consuming this is these systems are asking for their attention, so they need to context switch. They need to log into one system to check. They need to log into another system to understand what's actually happening, so they can do their job really well. So when we think about like the pure communication side that Slack provided, which was, hey, rather than sending you to email, to SMS, to other things like that, if you're just in Slack, then you can communicate entirely in there. And what we're doing in platform is the same thing with systems. Rather than going into each individual siloed system, you can kind of respond to these events in one layer, in one place. So I'll give you an example. For example, if I'm a customer success person, I know I have a new customer because an opportunity closed in Salesforce or HubSpot, or maybe both, if we have both. And that allows me to act quickly and go, okay, let's rally the teams. Let's get if we're doing any services, get the services team involved. Let's make sure we make the right introductions. We can act quickly and collaborate and run workflows together to get it done. That's one type of an event. Another type of event for a success person might be, oops, there's some tickets or cases or whatever that went past SLA. That would be a good opportunity for me to proactively reach out potentially make sure that they're okay and that they're probably not super happy about that. So again, just showing how like we're giving people more superpowers to act quickly, because time does really matter. Or for example, if a Jira issue that a customer cares about for a particular project gets delayed, then that's something that you might want to have that success person reach out proactively and say, hey, we just pushed this back 2 months. We know it's critical for your process. So let's try to find ideas or ways in which that we can get you back on track. So this is, again, it's like about that transparency and giving superpowers of empowering humans to kind of, one, be aware of these events, but also driving that productivity as well. So we do see this transformation of best of breed as a catalyst for this human EDA, because we see that the more people are the more that people are informed, the faster they can act, the more effective they are in their jobs. So really bringing together those two worlds of human events and system events is where we're focusing our time. Like how do we really do that and empower people? So when we think about think about Slack specifically, and I'll just quickly, I know they've talked a bit about Slack, but I think also a lot of what we've talked about is sort of more generic as well, but we're looking at ways of like saying, hey, when that event occurs again, how can I automate Slack to just do it again and or sort of do some form of automation? So again, it's like empowering the user to make those decisions, or the team, rather than waiting for a group to do it through a large scale BPM rollout. It's like, how do we let you sort of harness these events? And we've got a tremendous number of customer examples. One of ours is a telco provider that says that they're saving about $17 million a year by creating these lightweight workflows. Actually, in my prior past, the sort of empowerments I was so incredible. I was working with a large national bank here in the US. And of course, they had large BPM rolled out. That was great. And then we did an analysis and we said, well, we were looking at their Microsoft Access databases, which are these apps that were used at the departmental and individual level. And they had 55,000 of these Microsoft Access databases inside of their bank, which might seem like, oh my God, that's disastrous. But when you think to yourself, like, when you think about how you really run your competitive advantage, your business, do you run it in these highly systematized processes, or is it the 55,000 Microsoft Access databases that are empowering these users to be more productive? And we were going to do the same with Slack, is empower more people to be more productive in this new event-driven world. And they actually joked when we tried to transform it, they were saying, hey, please don't, because you're going to break the whole bank. And that's quite powerful. So that empowerment side for us is really important. So for Slack, clearly we need to be able to connect to your systems and bringing these two worlds together so that these humans can act and be empowered to create these automations. And I'll give another example of a bank called BCI. I talked to the CTO there, and he sort of joking with me that in the old bank, it was about batch and slow. And in the new bank, it was all about real-time and event-driven. And of course, he was deploying a whole number of EDA technologies to make it work. This bank is, by the way, quite large in Latin America and owns one of the largest banks in Florida. And they've moved to this model because of, well, a variety of reasons. One of that they articulated to me was actually fraud detection, which is, they have the EDA infrastructure. They've got like events piping through as you'd expect. They've got a massive data lake which stores all these banking events. And then they've actually incorporated Azure and some other artificial intelligence technologies to do fraud detection and alerting. Now that's cool, but then the human EDA side has to come in where it's okay, we've detected a fraud based on intelligence from the data in our data lake. Now we need to make sure the right team in the right region with the right accounts is seeing this very quickly so we can act on it fast, because like all these things, time counts, particularly in fraud. And so they do exactly that. It just creates a simple notification in Slack. The person can then simply say, okay, actually that one's okay. Or if it's not, it can escalate as needed. But what's really cool is they're kind of also using Slack to remix apps. So they're actually using it with Jira so that when the event occurs, they quickly verify that it's okay or not okay. It ultimately ends up putting the audit trail and the information into Jira, so they've got a record of it over time. So we're acting as that kind of mediation layer for the event that occurred. So I think that that's a fantastic example of BCI. And when actually he was quite candid with me when I said, well, hey, we're this engagement layer for the event-driven enterprise, his feedback was, yeah, is this new to you? And I was like, the position is, but we see a lot of these use cases. So again, you're seeing how EDA combined with something like a messaging platform, let's call it Slack, because that's where I work, can actually really empower humans to be able to act more efficiently and effectively in these scenarios. And it's not just BCI. We've also spoken to people like TD Ameritrade, who's also a customer of ours, and they give us similar reports of the work that they're doing. They often have said, like, hey, if it goes into email, it kind of just gets lost and they don't know where it is. So actually, when they think about the critical events that are driving the critical lightweight processes, not the systems, the sort of this highly systematized processes, but the lighter weight processes, that they needed a singular place to do that so they can get it to the right people at the right time, and that those critical processes, which are really critical conversations, occur. We see the same also with not to keep picking on banking, but I will. Also with HSBC Bank. Actually, I quite liked the quote from HSBC Bank, which I'll read to you, which is, previously when things would go wrong, there'd be this chaos. Emails flying around, people running around, escalations left, right, and center. But with Slack or messaging platform, we were able to pull it together so we could organize and prioritize and ultimately reduce duplication, getting people back up and running quicker, which I think is absolutely right. And if we want to think about speed, then we need, and with humans, we need to think about how we empower them. So, what I often think about, when you think about human in the loop in EDA, it shouldn't be create chaos. We shouldn't treat how they work as silos, but actually we need to treat what they're doing as another layer that needs to be part of this holistic movement of events. So we need to make sure that it's transparent, so they're working transparently, they're informed so that they can act. And maybe another way to put it, because we're talking about empowerment, is that we're empowering them to take back control of their productivity. And I think, when I spoke to HSBC Bank, I thought was really cool was that through creating this automation, through having these automations and sort of this work happening inside of Slack, as well as their EDA stack, they were able to radically accelerate their business. So they talked about how they were doing 7 customer journeys. And they were able to accelerate that because of bringing Slack together with the rollout of EDA for their event-driven transformation up to 200 customer journeys digitally launched. I'll come out in a second. That's 30 times more, just 31 times more, just in case you couldn't do the math, which I didn't do in my head. But a digital journey is something like, I want to reorder a checkbook, or I want a quote on a mortgage. So, releasing 7 of those digitally every year is good, but, releasing 200 is a lot better. In fact, it's 31 times better. And when you think about competitive advantage and rolling out and doing a transformation with EDA to event-driven in real time, those kind of numbers are really pretty potent and important. And I'd finish up actually with my own personal example, which is that in one of my prior businesses, if a new lead came in and we acted on it within the hour, we'd close the business 80% of the time. If a lead came in and we didn't act within the hour, or a competitor got there before us, we'd close the business 30 to 40% of the time. I mean, that's meaningful. Like, that is highly impactful on how your business runs. So when we think about EDA and we think about event-driven, we think about human EDA and how humans can improve and transform EDA itself. That's kind of the mission that we're on here at Slack. So that's the third pillar. How do we empower humans to turn noise into productivity? So those are 3 pillars: best of breed software model, scaling human interaction, ultimately turning noise into productivity. And that's kind of where I come back to the, if you like, the argument, but not the argument, with Stuart, our CEO, which is that when he says we're the 2% of your software budget that makes the other 98% better, that's kind of why we're making that claim, that if we can harness these events coming from these systems, and we can be an engagement layer for the event-driven enterprise and that digital transformation, that's how you see that tremendous value in your business. So with that, I will wrap up. Thank you very much for your time.